We have a phrase in New York. We say, you know, we're no smarter than anybody else. We've just had a lot of practice. I went to work on a beautiful Tuesday morning in September of 2001. And I came out of the subway to a street corner that I had walked for every day for the prior 10 years into a world that was utterly unfamiliar. American Airlines Flight 11 had just struck the north face of World Trade Center 1.
Some of the crises I've handled is the tsunami in Asia in 2004, and actually 84 Norwegians died there. And then, of course, the tragedy we had in Norway in 2011 when there was a bombing in the government complex and the shooting at the island of Utøya.
You know there will be a disaster or a crisis at some point. You know it'll come. But the little voice in your head is saying, you know, you're capable. You know, you'll roll up your sleeves, you'll get your team together and you'll get through it. That little voice in your head is wrong. And it's going to be the most painful and ugly and difficult experience of your life. Unless now put that team into a room and put that imagined catastrophic scenario in the room and talk through what you would do. And I'm not talking about a meeting. I'm talking about actually work the job in the moment. And you will then, that will be a stressful experience because that will be also an ugly discussion. And the boss will be like, how can we be so disorganized? And how can this look so ugly with all these smart people? But that's natural. That's what happens. And then if you come back a month later and do it again, you'll get some muscle memory around that process. It'll be, the outcomes in the job will be so much better.
Yeah, one suggestion is that you look at the scenarios, that you make a list of various things that could happen to your organization. And another advice I would give is to do some kind of exercises.
And think about out of the ordinary exercises. Think about, don't go for a standard, if you're in Grafton, let's go for a flood. Think about something different that's going to really stretch it in different ways. I'll often run 2 or 3 different scenarios at the same time, not big ones. It doesn't have to be a major, huge earthquake or something. 2 or 3 little things happening at the same time, compounding, is often what will drive, a really big situation, a really big challenge. So they're the big things that I'd be looking at, because if you haven't exercised a plan, it's not a plan, it's just some book on a shelf.
So traditionally in Australia, recovery is something we think about after response. So the fire trucks leave, the flood boats sail away, and then we say, okay, now we need to think about what recovery looks like. That's much too late.
The quickest, easiest thing you can do right now in getting ready for a disaster is to start thinking about what you're going to say on the day. It's really easy to write some talking points on your standard scenarios. And if you're dealing with a standard scenario, if you are, for example, Grafton, it's going to be flood, but come up with a couple of things on flood, a couple of things on fire.
What will our mayor be saying? What will our councillors be saying? What will our CEO be saying? We can actually develop those statements and then we can tailor them once the event has actually happened. And that prevents the lag that the community will experience if we haven't done that pre-work.
The role of council in the Tathra bushfire experience was pivotal. There was the firefighting effort that was underway, but underneath that was a need for care of the community, and overwhelmingly people turned to council for that. And it was great comfort to speak to the Mayor, to hear that council were already off and running on providing that care and those services that were going to be needed in the days and the weeks ahead.
One of the key things is the effect of the disaster on people's ability to process information. The effects of fear and grief and distress is that it makes our ability to hear and understand important messages much more difficult. So we have to make sure that we're communicating in a really effective way. We have to understand what our audience is actually experiencing so that we can tailor our messaging to what they can actually hear and understand.
The media, particularly emergency broadcasters, can help you with that. If you work with them before the event and meet each other, you can decide how are we going to work best when we all need to help people know what to do because a disaster has struck. So it's really important that if a council is the lead agency in an event that might have happened, so a flood for example, that they are very clear in their messaging. And if they are on the front foot and giving the right messages about what's happening during the event and then as it leads into the recovery process, we will look to a council for leadership on what their messaging should be.
I think councils can really prepare, particularly for that aftermath of a disaster, by being really engaged in existing networks within the community. Councils tend to know where their vulnerable people are. They know the networks that exist within that community already. So when we have an emergency or a disaster, they can channel their communications through those existing networks, and I think that's really critical. We often see communication come from further afield and it fails to hit the mark because it's talking to people rather than with them.
Relationships with the community are key to start with. So before anything happens, you should have really good relationships set up.
So it's really being aware that as a council, you're a perfect hub and that you can bring in and connect many other voices and bring in and connect lots of capacity, and that the community often has incredible capacity. I did some work in Lismore after the floods there, and the community groups had been profoundly valuable in warning and really even responding, and then in the recovery as well. Community are an amazing asset.
If I had one sentence for council staff about engaging with children and young people, I think it would be they are a resource in the community that is so often untapped. We are starting to get a better understanding of the kinds of roles that children can play, and I'd love to see council get more involved in this child-centred work. It has been the emergency management agencies to a very large extent, but I think there's huge opportunities for council to build community capacity by working with children and youth.